these roads and up in the clouds, but I've always felt that something's missing. That was until I found you.
Welcome to the new and better world based on the cooperation paradigm. I am your host, Guillermo Martin, and today it is my pleasure to bring you a dialogue with Dr. Sundiata, a good friend, systems theory thinker, and creator of the podcast Live Indivisible. The only way to make a difference is to be different. Not simply different though, but better. We need to embrace an upgraded paradigm based on trust and cooperation. I thank you for being here today, and I hope you really enjoy our conversation.
We live in a debate-based society. We live in a society where we communicate in ways where oftentimes it raises tension. As a systems thinker, I realized that there's no solutions. There are no race relation solutions within the system of race. Race is a social construct. Religion has absolutely done some wonderful things for people, but it also has done some very horrific things for people as well. Again, I've seen progress over and over and over again, so there's no reason for me to think that progress will not continue to happen.
So, Sundiata, you have a really cool project. That's kind of like what I want to talk about today. And
Okay.
Also, I got to buy one of your t-shirts. I love Yall, which is
Yes.
one of the things that I like. When I met you, I'm like, oh, that's a cool t-shirt. I love Yall. Kind of want to have that t-shirt too. So here I am. I don't know if you can see it on the screen. I have my
Yeah,
t-shirt,
looks great.
and I recommend that you guys also get one. I'm gonna leave the link here in the description. And that's it. Sundiata, so if you don't mind, just introduce yourself. What is your background professionally, academically, and then we'll get started with some questions.
Sure. Well, thanks for inviting me, Guillermo. I'll never forget how we met. You know, you pulled me to the side and, you know, you shared that our visions, overlapped. A lot of things that I was sharing at the conference resonated with you, and you started sharing some of your ideas with me that resonated with me as well. So I'm really, and you've been very supportive of my work and the content I put out ever since. So I really appreciate the ongoing support, and I appreciate you inviting me on. And I'm happy you're moving forward with making your impact in the world and putting your vision forward. And I'm happy to be a part of it. So a little bit about me. You know, I am an anti-oppression activist. I am a social sustainability facilitator, a self-directed education organizer. I'm a realtor, a podcaster, a systems thinker, and I'm a dad and a friend. Just to name a few of the things that I'm currently doing. I've done a lot in my life in both the business and education world. So I have a unique perspective in terms of I'm someone who has not only am I someone who does research as an academic per se, but I'm also someone who's also like lived the experiences. Someone who's been an entrepreneur, who started businesses and companies, who's worked in the conventional school system. So I kind of bring a unique perspective to the work I do because I have the philosophical. I've done the philosophical research and taken the time to dive in from that perspective. But I've also have the hands-on perspective as well. So I think that's what makes the content that I put out, unique. So yeah, that's a little bit about my background.
I love it, man. A lot of things, and a dad obviously being probably the top most important thing, right?
Absolutely.
But yeah, wonderful. One of the things that I really love about your work is what you call authentic dialogue. And I would like to start with that. I think it's huge and it's an incredible concept. So why the world needs dialogue more than ever right now? What is exactly authentic dialogue?
Well, that's actually one of the titles I forgot to mention, the authentic dialogue facilitator. Yeah, I do so many things, but the question is, why does the world need authentic dialogue right now? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I'm pointing to the obvious, but I would like you to go deep down into that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So authentic dialogue is a way of communicating where you leverage conflict to strengthen relationships. Um, in the conventional sense, we live in a debate-based society. We live in a society where we communicate in ways where um, oftentimes it raises tension, it escalates tension and divisiveness through the ways that we communicate. Because within a debate-based communication framework, it's about competition, it's about winning, it's about us versus them, it's about proving the other person wrong. Oftentimes that happens in a lot of different ways. Oftentimes it happens through power dynamics where, let's just say, you have a boss employee dynamic where the boss kind of has the last word because they have that title. Um, or someone has a title, let's say teacher, let's say, police officer,
Mhm.
parent, husband, preacher, like all these various, power over, dynamics that exist in our society where people will leverage that power in order to win a debate or win an argument or get their way. Um, we also see it in a sense where some two people may have a disagreement or a conflict, and the person who is more quick-witted, let's say quick-witted, more someone who is more expressive verbally will win a debate or win an argument versus someone who may be more introspective, and that person may take more time to process information. Doesn't mean that they are less than or have less, intelligence or less value in what they feel. It's just some people are more introspective where it takes them time to really process things and communicate in a different way than someone who is quick-witted, very extroverted in the way they speak. And oftentimes those people may win in a debate-based, situation as well. And finally, I'll share like an example of our debate-based framework is our politicians. They set the tone, in our society in terms of, again, how to win. And when we see debates within politics, we see a lot of, smear campaigns. We see, putting one another down. We see, name calling, whether it be through commercials and ads or whether it be in the formal debates. You see very little learning. You see very little listening to one another in order to understand each other's perspective. And you don't see working towards common ground, which are all, principles of authentic dialogue. So the beautiful thing about authentic dialogue is it's the total opposite of everything I just explained. And it's a way of communicating to the center. It's a way of creating win-wins. It's a way of finding common ground so that both parties can feel good about whatever decision is made going forward. Both parties or all parties. There's a way for this to be done in a one-to-one setting. There's a way for it to be done with larger groups as well. The most important things about authentic dialogue are listening. That's the most important thing, listening. And understanding that we all have different lenses. We all have different perspectives. And understanding that there is no individual truth, there's only collective truth. So no matter how right you or I may think that we are, if it doesn't resonate with the other person doesn't feel valued and respected and heard, then again, you're creating division. You're creating division versus creating cohesiveness. So authentic dialogue does that. It's a magical process when done correctly. And the final thing that I'll share, in addition to listening to one another in an authentic way, is also something called tolerance, which is really, really important and a really important ingredient to authentic dialogue. And tolerance just is having the capacity to understand that there are views and beliefs and perspectives that exist in the world that are different than yours. And it relieves you of the stress of feeling like everyone has to be the same. So by raising our ability to be tolerable, we can, again, listen to each other in a different way and understand each other in a different way. And ultimately, we can come up with, common solutions that everyone can consent to and feel good about.
And you facilitate seminars for companies and for groups and even like maybe couples, marriage and stuff like that?
Yes, all of the
Okay.
above.
Okay, so people take a note on that because I believe authentic dialogue is probably, if not the most, I don't know, perhaps it's the most healing tool that we could have, right, in our world. And definitely the example that you share with us, the politicians, it's always frustrating for me to see how, like you said, the wittiest politician and the quickest guy to say something funny, and people will clap, like, yeah, like, I mean, is that really like what we want in politicians? Intelligent people that like ponder things, or we want to just somebody like quick and funny, and
Right.
people are going for these things,
Yeah,
It's a shame. It's a shame,
it
but
is.
huge. I mean, authentic dialogue. We could just have one podcast on that,
Hmm.
and maybe we will at some point. But I really
Yeah,
want to like pick your brain today and like talk about so many things. Let's talk about systemic violence, and how many times we hear in America and United States, they talk about this is the land of the free, right? They say, and a place of opportunity, and you can like pick yourself up from the bootstraps and make whatever you want. But the truth is like there is like a system in place, and that system maybe is not the most conducive to the things that we want. So there is some kind of systemic violence, and I'd like to talk with you about the roots. Where do you think the roots of this systemic violence?
sure. Well, when you want to talk about the roots of it, the or origins
Yeah,
of the
as deep as we
systems,
can go.
okay, the systems that currently, are pervasive in human societies, primarily, um, you know, quote unquote civilized societies,
Hmm.
capitalistic societies, um, yeah, colonized societies, which again are the majority of societies currently in the mainstream. And I like to point that out because there still are indigenous societies that exist throughout the world in small pockets of the world where they live by a totally different code.
Hmm.
And but within the societies like the ones that we were raised in, the root cause of the divisiveness, the violence that we see is due to what's called power over. Um, and it originated, I'm going to go back to where it originated and just help people to understand how we got here. Humans evolved on Earth approximately 2 to 300,000 years ago, and Homo sapiens evolved because there were other human species that existed prior to Homo sapiens, which is our species, that are now extinct. Homo sapiens are currently the only extant human species or hominoid species that exists. And for the first approximately 99% of the existence of Homo sapiens on Earth, Homo sapiens lived in egalitarian hunter-gatherer societies. And egalitarian societies were built on power with frameworks and systems, meaning they shared everything. And everything was shared, and roles were equitable, etc. And they lived in small nomadic bands, and this was prior to the agricultural revolution. When the agricultural revolution took place about 10 to 12,000 years ago, which is fairly recently, know, and fairly recently, considering the span of time that humans have been on this earth. When the agricultural revolution happened, basically that was the first time where humans became sedentary. They were able to set up, sedentary tribes and villages and farms and all these things, and they were able to procreate more. So population boomed after the agricultural revolution, and they had to learn different ways of being in relationship with one another. And based on the evolutionary, neurological processes at that point, based on their abilities to communicate at that point, etc., they fell into power over control systems where, there's a lot of info out there in terms of, the how and the why. But the story I'm sharing is kind of a general overview that is widely accepted in the scientific, world. And basically, once they had land and they were able to grow crops, now they had something that they could possess for the first time and take ownership of. And once you could possess something and take ownership of it, there may be other people who want to come and take it from you. So there became this protection mechanism that came into play. And because of that protection mechanism, certain people rose up into power, and then all the power over and control systems that exist in society, they evolved. So they evolved out of that time frame, and they just have continued to evolve from there. We evolved into the era of kings and queens having power over the commoners, and ultimately every evolution has taken bits and pieces of the previous evolution, and it just morphed into what we have today. So you'll see elements of freedom within human societies, but you also see elements of power over and dominance and and control as well. So yeah, I'll
What
stop
is
there.
one is perhaps in your view one of the most oppressive systems that we have right now in our societies, Western societies?
Well, it's hard to say which is the most, because they're kind of one and the same. From a systems thinking perspective, again, we understand that everything evolves from something else. So after power over evolved in human societies, from that came patriarchy. And patriarchy, the whole idea that men have power over everything, males have power over everything. And, that whole, concept became very oppressive to non-men. It also became oppressive to young people and children, and also to nature and the environment and animals.
Mm-hmm.
So patriarchy is a huge, force that still exists in society. It's been chipped away at a lot, but it still exists in a lot of ways as well. From patriarchy evolved religion, and religion has been used as a tool to control, the masses as well. And from there, you had ownership, and you had capitalism, you have systemic racism. There's so many power over and control systems that exist in society, as well as our conventional education system, and they all evolved from one another, and they all play a role. So within a systems thinking context, they are one and the same. Within that paradigm, within that power over paradigm, they're one and the same, and they all are interconnected. They're all interdependent, and they're all interrelated. They all depend on each other and feed on each other,
Mm-hmm.
feed off of each other.
Okay, and you mentioned one of them being racism. And if you don't mind, I'd like to talk to you also at this, because you used to have a podcast, and I got to listen to some of the last episodes of that podcast, and I thought it was extremely insightful, and the way you share your vision, how to move forward with this situation. Because if I remember from some of our conversations, what we see normally, the activists that we have fighting for minorities' rights, perhaps they're not like approaching this according to you in the ideal way. So after all those interviews that you did with people on that podcast, like, what are the main points that we can take away to move forward in a more healing way, to maybe start chipping away and fixing the situation that we have still today?
Sure. So before I go there, I just want to share with everyone that everything I just explained about systems and the power over can be found at my podcast called Theory of Indivisibility, which breaks it down in a very cohesive way. If anyone is interested in learning and understanding that in more depth.
Yeah, and I'll leave a link to that on the description as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the podcast that you're referencing was called Race Haven, Solutions-Focused Dialogue about Race Relations in America.
Mm-hmm.
And that podcast, I learned a lot. I learned a lot while doing that. I did it for 2 years. Prior to that, it was a Facebook group where there were over 1,000 members at the height of it, where I just simply had a goal of bringing people together to authentically dialogue about race relations, as opposed to what I was consistently seeing in my communities when I talked to my friends, as well as on Facebook and social media, where, again, it was all divisive. It was all us versus them. There was very little listening and learning, and it was more, I'm right, you're wrong. And because of my education in authentic dialogue, I saw the divisiveness and all of that, and I wanted to create a platform where we could authentically dialogue about these things so people could learn. And ultimately, that podcast led to Theory of Indivisibility. And the reason why is because once I put my systems thinking hat on and I understood what was happening, as a systems thinker, I realized that there's no solutions. There are no race relation solutions within the system of race. Race is a social construct. And if you continue to have arguments and debates using the language of that social construct, you literally are going in circles and leading yourself back into the problem. Every time you're leading yourself back into the problem. Most people think in linear ways, like I used to think as well before I learned systems thinking. So most people think that A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D, and that we can eventually, in a linear way, lead ourselves out of the problem. What most people don't understand is that we live in a world of circles. We don't live in a linear world. We live in a world of circles and systems and feedback loops, okay? So the feedback loops within the conversation of race, again, just always led us back into the problem, which was us versus them, divisiveness. So what I learned is, as a system thinker, I learned that, again, there's no solutions there. So I felt like I was contributing to the problem. I got to the point where I felt like I was contributing to the problem in a way, because ultimately, while I know a lot of people learned a lot, and it broadened their worldview, it broadened their perspectives about race relations, and a lot of people got a lot of value from that work, I realized that there were no solutions there. And I realized in order to create solutions to that problem, we have to create new systems. We have to create systems that make the old problems obsolete. We have to reject race as a social construct and create something totally different. And ultimately, that is the work that I'm doing with Theory of Indivisibility.
Man, I absolutely love it. And it's one of those quotes that you share with me that is one of your favorite ones, and it's also one of mine. Basically, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking that we used when we created them, right? By Albert Einstein. And one thing that you said that I really like is that we also have to upgrade to change our language. As long as we're using the same language, we're going to be still trapped in this linear thinking, right? Can you give us some examples of what would be a new way of communicating, talking about those relationships with better language?
Sure. So some of the things that I've done, for example, in terms of the context of race, one is just realizing that there's no scientific, natural basis to it. Race, again, is a made-up human construct, and it was made for reasons. It was made to support colonization and white supremacy as a system. A few hundred years ago, it was created to support those systems. Again, both power over and control systems that were created to dominate and, privilege some and disprivilege others. So one of the things that I've chosen to do is I've chosen to reject race altogether. So I don't use racial terms anymore in terms of we're speaking about language. So I prefer to refer to people by their name, first and foremost. So to me, you're Guillermo. I don't see a race, okay? It's irrelevant. You're Guillermo. And I choose to get to know you as an individual. And I choose to put down any racial biases, any racial stereotypes, and choose to get to know you as an individual.
Can I pause you right there? I'm sorry, but I had to share these because you really helped me once. And if you remember, we were talking about conversation about these, right? And I said something like, it's better not to see colors, right? I don't see any colors or something like that. And that's something that is very unpopular to say.
Right.
And if you say that, it's like if you are a person that is totally unaware almost and uneducated on this topic.
Yeah.
But what you're saying, and you helped me that day to try to explain to the rest what I was trying to really say, which is if you agree what you're saying also here.
Yeah.
And man, I was like, whew, man, you helped me on that one. And yeah, I would like to talk about that because it's such a change, but in a way it can be also misunderstood. So it's tricky. It's very tricky.
It's very tricky. And it takes being able to preface things the right way. It takes understanding the context behind, it takes understanding the context behind the paradigm that most people still reside in, speaking to that context, speaking to that paradigm before moving them in the direction that we're going. So, for example, if you say I don't see color, that's very triggering for a lot of people. A lot of people who are, activist minded and socially conscious and aware and get triggered by race related issues, they get triggered by that. And oftentimes when people hear I don't see color, what they're hearing, what they've been programmed to hear is I don't care about the differences, the current societal differences, the current societal oppressions due to the current conditions, right? Of race relations, et cetera, based on our history. That's what they hear when I don't see color. So you won't hear me explain it that way. Now, even when I'm explaining it, you won't hear me say I don't see color. You'll hear me explain things in the way that I was doing and where I was going with it. But even with me doing that, someone may say, you're basically saying I don't see color. And that's where, again, the skill of authentic dialogue comes in, where it's being patient enough to ask one another questions, learn from one another to gain that deeper understanding, and not just be so quick to respond and rebut and assume and make assumptions. So that's where asking questions comes in and is so important. So
bingo.
Yeah, that's where it comes in. But to further explain, how I reject race, again, I see Guillermo, and I choose to get to know people individually instead of making blanket generalizations. In addition to that, I don't use the term Black people or white people. If I use those terms, I feel like I am perpetuating that's the system of race. The system of race is divisive. It was created to be divisive. So why would I continue to speak to it? I don't use those terms. If I'm trying to explain someone, if I have to generalize, because first of all, I'm just going to use your name. I'm intentional about that. I don't speak in terms of Black people and white people. I speak in terms of people and names. And I intentionally leave out race when I'm explaining who someone is. If I have to generalize for context, I will say a person of European descent or a person of African descent. That's personally what I use. Sometimes I'll say African American or European American, but I know everyone that descent isn't necessarily from America. Or I'll say a person of Asian descent, a person of Latinx descent, indigenous person, etc. I'll use that terminology to speak to ethnicity more so than to distance myself from race as well.
Okay.
So that's an example of how I use language to kind of speak to what's next.
Thank you. And that's a very empowering language. And that's just like a subset of one particular problem that we have, but we can also improve and upgrade our language in many other areas of our society, right? And I think that's so huge because when you change the language, you also change your thinking. So that's a powerful tool. Everybody make a note on this one. Let's talk about this question. And for some it might be obvious, but maybe like a too simple of a question, but it's difficult to answer in my opinion. Are we moving forward as a society, or are we declining? What do you see? Because we also know that the mass media is controlling things, and sometimes we only see a certain, maybe the negative too much and things like that. So what do you see in the world? What is your feeling? You're in the streets, you're talking to people. Right now, obviously, we're in a very specific situation with this pandemic, but beyond that, what do you see? Are we moving forward with things or not?
So, like everything, it's complex. It's a complex and nuanced discussion because it depends on your paradigm. So, within the current paradigm, the conventional wisdom, conventional paradigm that we currently live in, which is one that is dominated by party politics and corporations, rooted in capitalism and power over and control, things are declining because we see it falling apart in so many different ways. We see those elements falling apart in so many different ways, as well as in religion. religion is a part of those, those power over dynamics. And you see a lot of people walking away from religion. We see a lot of people we see a lot of people rejecting religion more so than ever. And for those who root their identity in religion, and they root the hierarchy of order in religion and the way things should be, that it is rooted in religion, it gives them comfort and it gives them a sense of order. They feel like everything's falling apart because they see more and more people walking away from those institutions. So from that paradigm is falling apart. For individuals like myself and individuals like I know you, how you think and how you see the world, we are progressing because our liberation, social and environmental sustainability, all rest in the decline of those older systems that I just mentioned. It all rests in the decline of power over systems, and it rests in the amplification of power with systems. So systems that don't divide us, but systems that bring us together. So we need the old systems, and relatively old, because again, they're only 10 and 12,000 years. So they're the recently old systems, really to get humans back to egalitarian ways, which were, humans, our ways prior to the agricultural revolution. So it's both. It's both declining. Old systems are dying, but new systems are being built up. And individuals like myself, we see a way forward, and we see it as being a good thing.
What we see definitely is change, right? And given our situation, probably change is a good thing. But to have change, you have to before destroy or undo, things. So that's always difficult for people.
Yeah.
I want to talk about religion, because you brought it up, and I think it's really interesting topic as well. And I do agree with you that religion has done has created so much violence in our world. But I'm going to be here devil's advocate, and I'm not like a religious person. I define myself more spiritually, like a spiritual person.
Right.
But I see that religion has been so helpful for some people as well.
Yes.
So to what extent religion we can put it in the bad thing basket or not, because I see a mix of things there. It's obviously been really bad for some people in history as well, but for others has been a life-changing thing, And
Yes.
Can we separate also, like, in your view, religion from spiritualism, or it's all in the same thing? What do you think?
Oh no, they're all different. And on my Theory of Indivisibility podcast, I speak to those complexities that you're speaking to when I do religion, the religion episodes. And religion has absolutely done some wonderful things for people, but it also has done some very horrific things for people as well. And you can't admire one without also being aware of the other. And I feel like, unfortunately, we live in a world where people are willing to accept this whole idea of the lesser of two evils type mindset, where it's like we're willing to accept some dysfunction because of the good that we see, because people are thinking in that linear way. They're not realizing that we have the power to create systems that keep the good without the bad, without harming other people. So for example, religion has provided some good foundation for people, some values to live by, rooted in love and all these wonderful things. But it also has created standards of living that oppress people who don't fit within those standards. And one of the groups of people that I could think of the most that comes to mind the most is homosexual people, and what religion has done to ostracize them and to cause their lives over the last few hundred years to literally be a living hell, because they didn't fit within the box of whoever wrote the religious text, the person in power and the people in power who set that in motion and set those rules and guidelines and set those standards, left them out and erased them. Not only did they erase them as being normal, but they also demonized them. But as history has shown us, and we can see it more clearly in present day than any time before, Homosexual people have always existed and they continue to be born. So, if we're looking at reality, and also that homosexuality exists in other animal species as well. So the problem with anything that's standard is that humans are not standard. Humans are dynamic and complex. So that's also one of the problems within all those power over systems is that they create standards and they say that people have to live by those standards in order to be considered decent, moral, whole, or normal. The reality is there's no such thing as normal. There's no such thing as a moral standard because, again, humans are dynamic and complex and we manifest in different ways, just like everything else in nature. Humans are nature. So that's one example that I can explain about one of the ways that religion has done a disservice to human societies. And in terms of spirituality, yes, spirituality is natural. So I believe that spirituality falls within the power with paradigm, and it's a natural thing. And I believe that the good that people feel in their spirit, the calm that they get when they center themselves and focus on, that greater power that connects us all, which some people believe is the power of love. That's rooted in spirituality. That's rooted in getting in touch with your inner self and the power within you that connects you to everyone else. So I know that people feel those forces. Some people feel it through prayer. Some people feel it through meditation, and other forms of just connecting to a source energy. And I believe that, yes, spirituality is very natural. It's something that's in all of us. But I believe it to be something that's separate from religion, that religion co-opted. As religion evolved, it co-opted those natural spiritual feelings and kind of, put it all together to create what we know as religion today. And that has done a lot of relative good, but it's also done a lot of relative harm.
Yeah, and sometimes spiritualism also is attacked even by religion, by some religious groups. They even make fun of it sometimes. Oh, you're spiritual. You believe in whatever you want, like there's one way to think that is the right thing, the right way, and everything else exclusively, and everything else is just wrong, and who knows, you might even go to hell, Obviously, when a religion puts that statement out there, woof, it's a dangerous thing, So thanks for sharing that. And let's imagine that you become this powerful being or politician. Tomorrow you're voted, you're the president. Well, we know that president doesn't have probably a lot of power anyway, but imagine that he does. What are, in your opinion, the less the lines of less resistance? What are the things that you would like work on the first to try to turn things around and improve things for people?
So the thing that I would do is, one, I would reject that system altogether. And I would go out and create, and it's something that I feel like I'm in the process of doing through the work and the evolution of my work, is to create a new system that makes the old system obsolete. Me being the quote unquote president would only mean that I'm perpetuating those power over dynamics. It means that I'm perpetuating the idea that there's, someone who is all powerful, someone who has, that charismatic leader who, is going to think for all of us and make decisions for all of us and lead all of us. That's not what I have any interest in doing. Systemically is unsustainable. It's proven to be unsustainable over time, and not only unsustainable in terms of the impact, in terms of, how a lot of people still are oppressed, but also the environmental degradation that has continued to happen. And we see it very clearly through climate change. Even COVID-19 can be tied back to climate change and the destruction of natural habitats and biodiversity in the ways that, our ecosystem needs to thrive. A lot of people don't make that connection, but it's one that you cannot continue to ignore. And whether humans continue to ignore it or not, nature isn't. And nature is striking back in more and more powerful ways to balance out the ecosystem. So with that being said, that's what I would do.
So you would, first of all, you would dismantle the whole operation, right? Say, okay, we need to change the system, political system, and then, but you need to bring something new, right? A new system. What would you work on the first? Would it be education, or what kind of measure in the short term you would implement to help people?
So I wouldn't work to dismantle anything. I think that would be a waste of energy. I think the energy.
Well, you said to pull the plug, right? To stop giving energy to that, right? Is that what I understood?
So what you're hearing is me saying that I wouldn't even want that position. I would continue to do what I'm doing currently and invite other people to join me. So teaching and facilitating authentic dialogue and making people more aware of authentic dialogue, because that's the communication framework of a power with egalitarian, framework in society. Also, unschooling, self-directed education, continuing to be an organizer and someone who advocates and amplifies that work as well, and helping young people and their families walk away from conventional education system, which again continues to perpetuate all the oppression that's embedded within the power over systems. I will continue to do those things and also continue to illuminate and help people see the systems like I do through my podcast, because I believe that once people can see the systems and name them, then they will feel empowered to walk away from them. So just continuing to do the work that I do, and also building community around the work, and hoping the next phase of the work that I'm doing is, find like-minded, like-hearted people and pulling resources so that we can create our own communities and skill share and resource share and continue to transition away from the current dominant conventional paradigms, social, economic, and political paradigms.
Okay. You answered my question. Maybe I didn't voice the question properly given the paradigm that we want to work with. But you answered my question, right? Which is to focus on unschooling, community, and making people aware of all these things that we have to have to move forward. Yes, definitely.
So,
yeah.
I want to say that I believe that you asked the question properly in the way that you intended, in the way that I believe a lot of people frame a question like that. And right. I want you to know that I intentionally answered it the way I did to force people to see the difference. So I appreciate you asking it that way, because I want to put people who are listening in a position where their brain starts to see that there's two different paradigms.
Right. Because that's how most people would ask that question. If you were this powerful being, what would you do? And that's disempowering for people. Like you said, we have to totally change even the way we ask the question to really integrate this new paradigm. Definitely.
Because I don't want that power. I don't want that power.
Right. It's like, I love the story of Lord of the Rings, and I think there are so many stories like that in literature that show you how much power corrupts, right? And absolute power even corrupts more. And it's just the struggle of human beings always to not want that power, because the heroes always, at the end of the day, they reject the power. They don't want that power because, it comes with a lot of danger. Definitely. And I also remember the ring, right? The ring in Lord of the Rings, it comes with so much power. And this, if you remember the movies, constantly calling you, and he didn't want to put the ring on and things like that. It's really cool.
I also want to point out the underlying theme behind what I was sharing as well, is that everyone has power. And I hope that my work and my words helps people to realize that they have the power to be the change. Instead of a lot of people waiting for some magical hero leader to create the change they're seeking. My message is for everyone to realize they have the power within. And that if everyone just starts transitioning themselves and living the change and living the difference that they want to see in the world, that's how we see a very grassroots, movement forming and growing person by person, just by rejecting the old systems and speaking to and living something, whether they choose one way to do it by unschooling, for example, or being a conscious parent and rejecting the idea that they have to dominate children. Just if they just focused on that alone, they are making a change and walking away from a power system into something more equitable with the power wave systems.
We all have to claim that sovereignty, or to be sovereign beings, powerful beings. And speaking of children, another T-shirt that I really like, and I think many of us had that day, is that children are people. Simple statement, but it is so true. We just have this relationship with children. It's totally power over, like you were talking about, and we have that relationship with so many things, with our environment and everything. Because the interesting thing is we are constantly in relationship with things, with everything, not just with people, with the environment, with everything. So that's the change of the paradigm, and that's what I also talk about. I simply use different words. That is honestly, and that's why when I heard you talk about these things the first time, is like, I believe there is this thing called the collective unconscious or unconscious. I can't remember unconscious. I think Jung talk about this. So they are kind of like ideas floating around in the environment somewhere in the ether, who knows? And we both connected to the same idea, at least part of the idea of power over, power with, cooperation, competition. So you can be in relationship with things in a collaborative way or in a competitive way, which comes down to the relationship with power, right? It's basically the same.
Right.
So I loved it. When I heard you talking about these, man, it's just like, woo, I need to talk to this guy.
Yes.
And also another thing that I really like when I hear your podcast, which obviously everybody needs to do, is to that positivity that you have. And I think that's so important. And you believe that we can actually live in a world, like in a dream world, in a utopian world. But that's so hard for people to see. Can you just talk about this, elaborate a little bit more? Why it's so difficult for people, and why do you think that we can actually do it, make it happen? Because we have to believe in this idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I get a lot of pushback, and a lot of people say, oh, that's just utopia. A lot of people will try to diminish and say, oh, that's just idealistic thinking, wishful thinking. It's not based in reality, et cetera, et cetera. And none of that phases me, because I understand that the only thing that's constant is evolution. Evolution is always happening, is always occurring. And I also see evidence. I see evidence over and over and over throughout history where something that people said couldn't happen or wouldn't happen has happened. As a person of African descent who is a descendant of enslaved Africans here in America, my ancestors, there were ancestors of mine who were born into chattel slavery and died in chattel slavery, and probably could never see a world where that wouldn't be the case. There were people of European descent who were who were owners of enslaved Africans, who thought and advocated for that institution of slavery always existing, and there were people who lived and died thinking that institution would always exist. But here we are at a time where it doesn't. Same thing with women having the right to actually own things, having the right to vote and having the certain liberties and being able to work and own companies and have their own bank accounts. And like all these things that women couldn't do just literally about 150 years ago, women couldn't do so many things without a man or a husband or a father doing it with them or for them. But they now have the liberties to do them for themselves. There were people who lived for hundreds of years who thought that would never happen, and it's happened. So again, I've seen progress over and over and over again. So there's no reason for me to think that progress will not continue to happen.
Yeah, that's a very logical idea. Mm-hmm. All you have to do is study history, right?
Yeah.
And the example that you shared with us on the podcast recently was that we put people on the moon, right? And that was just like a dream.
Yeah.
So absolutely, people. I mean, imagine that, right? And we just need to really people believe in this thing. It's a real tangible thing, but you cannot have it before you build it. You have to believe it, build it, go for it. But if you don't even believe in it, you're not going to get started with the first step. So we have to start working in that direction. That's all we have to do, and have the will that you were saying, right?
Yes.
Yeah, man, definitely. This has to happen, whether we see it or not. Maybe our children will.
Yeah.
What
I see
what
it.
is what?
I said I see it clearly.
I see it clearly too. And that's the thing, like it's just like so tangible. We have so much, Sundiata, we have so much technology. I call you up and you're in Atlanta, right?
Yes.
And man, we can see each other, we can talk, and there are so many things that we can do with our means these days. Let's go for it. Let's just go for the big things, for the big dreams, people. What else do you have in store, and what projects, and how can we support your work?
Well, you can find all of my work at my website, which is drsundiata.com, like short for Dr. Sundiata. So it's literally drsundiata.com. All my work is there. I will continue to do the work that I'm doing and continue to amplify that work. I'm looking forward to continuing to work on Theory of Indivisibility and finishing out season 1. There's, I believe, 2 or 3 more systems that I will analyze and synthesize through the process that I've been going through. Basically, what I do is I take a system, like currently I'm on capitalism, and capitalism part 1 is I dissect the evolutionary origins of that system. Part 2 is we dissect the current complexities of that system. 3, we talk about the solutions. We talk about the next system that is going to replace capitalism. And one of the things that I love about what I'm doing is that I'm showing people what's already happening. So a lot of the things that we're talking about, they're already in motion. There are already people creating new systems, creating new paradigms and ways of being. And through my show, I amplify those and I share what they are. So we're going to cover systemic racism and education next, and democracy. So democracy, systemic racism, and systemic racism and education will be the final 3 for season 1. And then I plan on coming back with season 2, and I'm thinking about a name change. I'm thinking about changing it to Sustainable Solutions. And with season 2, I will be interviewing people and about all of these systems and just talking about the work that's being done to create sustainable solutions, solutions that do not oppress directly or indirectly. And I believe that's possible. So we don't have to continue to accept the lesser of 2 evils. We don't have to continue to accept that religion does so much good, but also there's ways of living and being on earth where we can create systems that create positive feedback loops that empower and give life and sustainability to, human systems as well as natural systems. So that's the work that I will continue to do. I will also continue to be a self-directed education organizer, continue to do trainings and mentor people who want to start self-directed education cooperatives. And that information is found at my website as well under self-directed education, or SDE. Continue to facilitate dialogues.
And I believe you have a course that you offer either at a discount or free about authentic dialogue.
Yes.
On your website?
At my website. Yes, under courses, you'll find that. You'll also find where I'm currently doing virtual classes for teenagers on authentic dialogue through the OutSchool platform. So anytime I can, get this work out to the masses and share this information in any context, that's what I plan on doing, going forward. And I feel like if I just keep doing that, then I will be continuing to do my part.
Awesome. Well, I'd add to that, to everybody go and get a Love Yall t-shirt. Also, you can become a patron of Sundiata. I'm a patron of him myself. And
Yes,
any final thoughts for our friends in the Cooperation Paradigm channel before we go?
I just want to say thank you all for listening. I hope that if anything piques your interest, you'll check out the website and check out the shows. And I would love to hear from you. Shoot me an email, dr.sundiata@gmail.com, to share your thoughts. And all feedback is appreciated. It really fuels and helps me to keep going. So thanks.
Awesome. Well, people, let's just build a community, a positive community subscribe and like this video, share with as many people as you can. And if you have any comments, you can either leave them here below or send an email to Sundiata. Thank you so much, and I'll see you on the next.
Thanks for having me.
And there you have it. I hope you really enjoyed this dialogue with Dr. Sundiata as much as I did. The truth is that if we have the willingness, there is nothing that we cannot achieve as humanity. We have the power, we have the technology. Now we just need to apply it in more inspiring and constructive ways. We all can make a positive difference, each and every one of us. Please check out the links in the description where you will find Sundiata's podcast Live Indivisible and his contact information, and don't forget to buy a I Love You All t-shirt. They are awesome. Stay around and see you in the next.